Welcome to Påskallavik and to our local museum called CALLERSTROMSKA MAGASINET. Here we collect knowledge and memories from the past. That's why we keep our doors open in the summer times for visitors and tourists to see. My name is Kalle Holmström and I will be your guide for today. Here at CALLERSTROMSKA MAGASINET we have collected memories from the past, and it's our goal of spreading this knowledge forward. That is why we have opened our doors every summer for over a decade, so that you can take part in the exciting history of our town. The permanent exhibition about Påskallavik's history has now been recorded in audio. For learning more about our past, please come and visit us in our museum. It is located by the Baltic next to the guest harbour. On the second floor there is an exhibition that changes its themes every summer, and there is always something new to see. Let us begin. Påskallavik has a population of around 1100 people. The surrounding area includes the village of Vånevik in the north, Döderhult in the west, Emsfors and Emsfors in the south. Framing Påskallavik is an archipelago of small islands scattered over the Baltic coast, the largest being the fishing village of Runnö. The village offers a quaint harbour area with a small beach, summer cafe, guest harbour, and parking places for motorhomes. On the main road you will find a grocery store, pizzeria, and a gas station. A few steps away from the gas station is Källströmsgården, full of amazing sculptures and open to cafe visitors and art enthusiasts. Following the picturesque narrow road which begins at the church, and you will discover Nötö, which offers camping, our second beach, a football field and view of the Baltic on one side and a peaceful lake on the other. Whether you come with a boat, a vehicle or a bike, I think you all can agree that you have found yourself a hidden gem. This village alongside of the east coast, just south of Oskarshamn. The name Påskallavik, that means Easter Everybody Bay if you strictly translate it from Swedish, has nothing to do actually with Easter. Back in the 1700s, the name was spelled Påskallavik, and Påsk is actually a spice that you used for spicing up beer or spirits. So if you can imagine back in the day when there were barely any houses here, but on the ridges of the marshlands and by the water you find actually this spice pors, and probably loads of it. And when the seafarers came close to land, that's what they spotted, and that's where the name comes from. Påskallavik Bay is deep and pretty well protective against winds and waves, and has always been a good location for meeting up with the locals and the islanders. Behind me here is the road that we take today called Kustvägen, and back in the day it was a medieval road that took travelers between Kalmar and the main city of Stockholm. Here you can meet up with traders, soldiers, travelers, foreigners, and with the location that it was actually meeting up with this bay itself, it ended up being very important. The year 1689, this little village got the privilege from the king to hold markets all year around. And this was unusual at the time, for cities and villages only hold markets once and twice a year. Here they also built ships and smaller boats. In this museum where we're standing today is boats that has been created by shipbuilders in the island of Runnö. And by 1930 a local boy, found this one in the mud of Emån, which is a river 2k from here. This is actually a canoe, and we dated it to the year of 1430, and it was used by hunters and fishermen on the river of Emån. In Påskallavik, the base of the Stone and Bronze Age would sludge again. The land uplift continued to displace the sea water, and what were once bays had now become fertile fields. The stone axes that took down the first trees around our area had long since been replaced by modern iron tools, and entire forests could now be cut down to make room for a growing population. Around ancient burial sites and invisible settlements, fruit trees were planted with beautiful flower beds. And when a Påskallaviker puts the shovel in 4,000 years of layers of soil, yes, then maybe a small sharp flint will see the light of day once again. A piece of history from Påskallavik's earliest hunters. I was mentioning the canoe from the year 1430, but Påskallavik is much older than that. Before Iron Age and the Bronze Age, the sea level was much higher than it is today. Påskallavik is suited by the Baltic, and then the sea level was almost 8-10 meters higher than it is today. So where you can see houses around us was actually marshland and sea beaches. About half a k from here we can start finding flint in old farm fields. So that means that Påskallavik is at least 4,000 years old. The name Påskallavik was created in the 1600s, and the oldest village around here is called Emsfors, which sits close to Emån and the river Emsfors River. The name Emsfors River we think comes from that Emån is flowing over every springtime, which actually means in the old saying that it's calving, the same as cows do when they make birth to the calves. So it's calving and the water rinns over to Emsfors. At Emsfors was an old tavern, and that's where the travelers were resting when they were passing through. The village of Emsfors is still very small, it's under 100 residents. And back in the day it was about the same number, but fewer houses. In the 1710, 1711 it struck with the plague. And in the church books you can read about a terrible plague that swooped through Sweden and killed a huge population, especially Emsfors, that most got killed and the whole village were wiped out. About that time it was an important owner of this area called Bös, Ivar Bös, and his daughter Sofia Bös. And this is kind of where it's getting interesting and where Påskallavik gets shaped. Because Ivar Bös is out rowing with a friend in the Baltic just outside here, and his boat capsizes and they drown. His daughter Sofia Bös is the one that's is testament to take over this huge land of Påskallavik with surroundings that was called Emsfors. But she was by herself and young, and there was Lars Callerström from Målilla that was asking to marry her in the year 1747. And with his knowledge on selling goods, trading and farming forest, that made this area flourish. Lars and Sofia Callerström got 9 children together. Only 3 children survived to adulthood. The son Edward is the one that takes over the small growing empire of Påskallavik. He invests in clothing factory by Emsfors, windmill, sawmill, expand the fleet, buildings in the harbor like this one where sits and stands today, CALLERSTROMSKA MAGASINET, and the mansion, the white mansion by Kustvägen up on the road here. It still sits on the same foundation as the mansion of Callerström was before. It got burned down in the 1860s and have had different shapes during the centuries. The society of the rich families in Oskarshamn and Kalmar County intertwined with marriage. And why they did that was because growing between the families make them stronger. One old relative to Callerström did a research and he said it was complicated to follow their family relationships. And he wrote like this: "With the Callerström in Påskalla and my family became very intimate throughout the 19th century and into this century. Without paper and pen, it is difficult to keep the family relationships in order." Behind me here is big rolls of paper, and it comes from the paper mill in Emsfors, which is suited 2K from here. It was established by a businesswoman, Elisabeth Callerström. She was married to Edward, but her husband died young in 1799. So it was herself that erected these big industry walls on the shoreline of Emsfors. This paper mill was a good investment, for they already had a logging industry established. So now they can convert the logging, the fiber, to paper pulp. And it was in their family for generations into the 20th century. Their 2 sons, Nils and Erik, inherited after Elisabeth died in 1822. But there was an issue at the time in Sweden, a lack of currency and a cash flow. So they made up their own currency under the name Nils and Erik Callerström. That was of course not allowed in Sweden, and they went to court. And today's date, some Påskallaviker still talks about the strong and mean Callerström family that have the monopoly and made their own currency. But that was the solution to pay off their workers and gave them the salary. After that, Callerström got actually fined for it, and the currency stopped getting used. But you can actually find at that time the currency all the way up to Finland. The monopoly of the brothers, Nils and Erik, kept going after the mother's death, Elisabeth. And for many years. Suddenly Erik dies and Nils is alone. He's devastated. And that's probably why he donated money and land to build a church in Påskallavik. You see, back then we didn't have a church here, and we had to take the bodies, if someone died, to Döderhult, which is in Oskarshamn, quite far from here. And there's a spooky story to tell.
One of the roads to the village of Döderhult from Påskallavik and Vånevik was in bad shape. Rocks of all sorts and steep hills made it difficult to travel with horse and wagon. If it was winter, the deceased could be stored in the barn until better weather conditions. But if it was a warm summer, you had to rush transporting your dead relative to holy soil before it started to smell. A certain steep part of the road just outside of Vånevik was known to be a trouble one. And it happened that you lost your cargo if you didn't take it careful. The casket fell, hit rocks on the way down, and out the body started to roll into the ditch. The dead body's soul was knocked out and lost its host. After that, these poor souls still looks for their casket, and with that the way to the holy soil, so they can rest. Now the ghosts haunt these grounds at night.
The next family that puts a greater mark in Påskallavik is the Kryger family. Behind me here is Ivar Kryger, and in the world he's known for the matches industry. With the marriage in, Callerström grew, and now suddenly the fleet is combined with the Kalmar fleet, and they are traveling the 7 seas all the way to China. Later, Ivar Kryger will have such a monopoly on just matches production and sales that it could resemble the Temple Knights, lending to warlords in Europe during the early Middle Ages. Ivar held whole nations in his grip. But it was Ivar's grandfather and Erik Callerström who reinvested in Emsfors paper industry. Together they merged the shipping companies into very great success, and the fleet expanded considerably. Earlier we talked about the shipbuilding industry, and here at Påskallavik we're building ships for centuries. The shipyard was suited at Nötö, just next to the church. The shorelines there were deep, and it was easy for the new build ships to get dropped in. They were building galleys and schooners, and all the way up to the size of 3-mast ships that took the goods of Callerström all the way to China. It was a big industry that involved a lot of people, and they had quite modern tools at the time. There was different boats that was built, and one of them was actually written about in a newspaper in 1860. On June the 23rd, Erik and Nils Callerström's shipyard at Påskallavik launched a schooner about the 6th gross tonnage, which in the baptism received the well-known name Garibaldi. Despite this, it became a real accident boat, because already in July the schooner lost in a storm both his masts and became ill-conceived.
Callerström's strong empire falls around 1917, but for all the properties of Callerström which gave income suddenly disappear. They has now dug a too deep grave to get out, and in 1918 the mansion holds an auction and sells out its interior. On the auction, relatives get the opportunity to buy memories. Mrs. Svensson does this, which is lucky for us, for an old painting over Sofia Bös, she who married the first Callerström in Påskallavik, was now saved for the future, as well as a gilded wall clock that is now hanging in the Påskallavik church. But besides Callerström's operations in Påskallavik and Emsfors, a flourishing stone cutter industry took place in Vånevik and Döderhult. From the mid-1800s until a bit into 1900, the standard of living increases thanks to all the work and also houses being built both in Vånevik and Påskallavik. Small and large stone quarries blooms in the forest and on these islands outside of us. Hammer blows are heard everywhere. And Emsfors bruk is further sold to continue to assist the society with work right up to the 1980s, where society continues to develop long after Callerström left Påskallavik with its 200 years of solid power. In Vånevik, granite was quarrying between 1870 and 1958. The interest in our hard rock was raised in Germany, and they wanted to use a building material that would last forever. An early German advertising poster shows that the company compared their product with Pharaoh's Egypt. Then it came to pass that the Germans came here and leased the lands around Vånevik, and this became a major economy boost with immigrants from all over Sweden and also from abroad. Everywhere in the forests, chisels were heard against stone. Forest was cleared and rails laid. Blacksmithies were built in connection with the stone quarries, and even streets and houses followed the expansion outwards. If you want to read more about the stonemasons' golden age in Påskallavik and Vånevik, you should visit the website www.hardklang.se and also walk on the Stonemason Trail, which is a historic forest walk just outside of Påskallavik.
What is our symbol in Påskallavik? Who's been standing here guarding us for 175 years? I'm talking about the Red Man, of course. The big statue that's 4 meters high that sits in the bay of Påskallavik. Why is it shaped as it is? Why is the color painted red, white and black? Well, it's also surrounded with mythology, history. Some people says it was a big ship that got lost in a storm and the galley figure got broken off and floated in here. Another person says 300 years ago someone drowned and he was erected up as a warning for the people around here to not fall into the same destiny. Well, we might have found, come a little bit closer to the conclusion, what is the truth behind him. Because we found an article from 1950s that maybe explained the truth to it. You see, when the church was built 1862, or started getting built, there were people working in the shipyard. And with the logs, they found a weird shaped log that was two-legged. And through that one, they start shaping a shape of a man. And for a head, they walked over to the carpenter chief of the church, asking if he could carve a head. And suddenly, they had the Red Man. The colors red, white and black was used for making the markers across Sweden and the Baltic. So those were the colors that they could use. And behind me here is the original statue. It was made by wood, like I said, and during a winter when it was thick of ice, a horse and a sled dragged this one out to the island where it sits today. But hard winter storms and time again were punishing this guy, and suddenly it broke off quite a few times. Even people shoot at it too. So it has been surviving as long as it could, and suddenly it gave up. So our local artist, Arvid Källström, decided to make a new Red Man. So we took down this gentleman here, and he erected one in concrete, and that's the one that stands there out today. So when you come to Påskallavik, please go down to the harbour and say hello.